Have you ever asked yourself this?
Is the grass really greener in Australia?
The Kiwi exodus continues, but now it's not just the 20-somethings. New research shows 42% of mid to senior level managers would consider the move.
The level and the number of people who are now looking at that as a viable option, that is the concern to me, because I think we will lose them for good.
So what is New Zealand lacking? Productivity.
We're not going anywhere. So we've dropped the ball.
Welcome to the NBR Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Shepherd. Do you know, or are you someone who has upped sticks and left New Zealand?
I've lived here for about a year now. I moved over from Auckland for the Sydney dream, and I'm going to tell you about the ways my life has changed since moving.
Anna Burson moved to Sydney a year ago, chasing better pay, better opportunities, better lifestyle. So Anna, I guess the first question is, what was wrong with New Zealand?
A great question, and I feel a little bit stitched up with that question. We lived in Auckland. My husband and I were living in Auckland probably there about 13 years, and it just got to the point where we were just a bit bored of it. It felt a bit small, and my husband is working on a business opportunity, and we needed a bigger pond.
Right. You needed more people to buy into the business opportunity.
Yep,
okay.
we did.
For you though, as well, was it enticing? What were you looking for?
Well, we started thinking about the move, I think it was 2022. So we'd obviously all gone through lockdown and we got really bored, and you're just kind of looking for something exciting. The borders are open and you're like, actually, I can move. Where should we move? Where would we move? And of course, Australia is so close to New Zealand, so we're still close to family. And I think 2022 was the year when it rained a hell of a lot in Auckland.
Yeah.
I remember hearing a news headline about we'd had 7 days of sun in total by, I think it was July. And I was feeling it. And, Sydney, Australia is just sunnier. So that was another good driver.
What kind of work do you do?
I am now an event manager, but prior to that, all marketing managing.
Right. So you're in that sort of managerial role. And so you're looking to move to Sydney. Was it hard to find a job?
Yes, it was. So I was applying for about 8 months before I landed a job.
And so when the job came through, were they paying more?
Yes, they were paying more.
How much more?
So in New Zealand, when I left, I was a marketing specialist. The role that I went to is marketing manager. And so I got, I think, about a 30% pay rise, including super.
Wow. You must have been stoked.
Yeah, I was very stoked.
Yeah. All right. So the pay was better, but when you landed and set up, was the job living up to the idea that there were more opportunities as well?
It definitely has given me more opportunity than I thought I would. At the time, I was very focused on let's just get a job. I was in the role 3 months, marketing managing, and then due to business needs, they were needing an event manager and then offered me the position. And I thought, why the heck not? And then ended up going to Dubai, ended up doing a series of events in Australia, and even got to duck home across the ditch for one in Auckland.
Are you enjoying it? You may have better pay and you may, have more opportunities, but what about your lifestyle?
I love the lifestyle. Admittedly, we live probably a smaller lifestyle than Auckland because we don't have a car. We're based on the lower North Shore in Sydney, so it's really easy to get around with the train and the metro. We're not at the beach as much as we thought we would be. But I mean, in saying that, the sunburn here is probably just as bad as New Zealand. So,
okay. So if you are enjoying it, even if it is a smaller lifestyle with no car, surely there's a downside.
Downside, well, the first one, of course, is not being immediately close to your family and your network. So growing a network in Sydney is challenging. It's very much a rat race. So if you think of Auckland and it's quite fast paced, Sydney is even faster.
Have you had any pushback from Aussie colleagues, or have you noticed any pushback about the number of New Zealanders relocating?
Absolutely no pushback from my Aussie colleagues. I work in a very multicultural office. So my manager is Kiwi, although she's been here for over 20 years.
Right.
And there's a few other Kiwis in the office as well. So very normal. The only pushback that I have had has been with the odd TikTok that's gone a bit more viral for me than I would have expected. And there's generally comments about being an immigrant.
Right. Okay. Anna Burson is one of those mid to senior people who have left New Zealand, the category that has now surfaced in new research.
So the labour market has come through various cycles in the past 4 or 5 years, and it's really interesting to see where it is now. The cycle that we're in at the moment, we're seeing that dynamic certainly in favour of the employer over the employee. And we can see that coming through with our results, seeing that only 57% of respondents expect a pay rise this year.
Shay Peters is the New Zealand and Australian head of recruitment company Robert Walters. Its survey of 7,700 mid to senior level managers has found only 10% of them believe they're being paid what they're worth.
And I think that's really where the attitude in New Zealand is at the moment from a labour market perspective. I think they're seeing a number of opportunities elsewhere outside of New Zealand. And where they're seeing those competitive rates being offered offshore, that's really hammering home when they reflect and they have a look at their own take-home pay. And that's compounded by cost of living. And that's should be the concern for the New Zealand economy. Because the flow-on effect of only 10% of employees believing that they're earning what they're worth means that they're going to look for other opportunities, whether that's in-country and that creates churn and that impacts productivity levels, or it's offshore and we're losing talent.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So churn is a concern for a business because why? They lose institutional knowledge, they lose experience.
Yes, 100%. So churn really halts progress for an organisation. So what we're seeing is that if that employment dynamic starts to shift and becomes a little bit more balanced, people will start to regain a little bit more confidence. Now that interest rates are dropping, businesses will get a little bit more confident, but the employee market or the labour market will feel a little bit more buoyant, a little bit more bullish about moving. Once they move, that creates big knowledge gaps in their organisation. And if we see only 10% of people think that they're getting paid what they're worth, then 90% of people may look for opportunities elsewhere. And if they start to move, we see institutional knowledge being lost. Organisations have to reset, they have to retrain talent, they have to upskill into their own organisation, and that halts productivity.
Churn can also mean relocation. By relocation, we're not talking within New Zealand. We are looking at the stats of New Zealanders leaving predominantly for Australia and then over to Europe perhaps. Is that right?
Yes, and that's one of my biggest concerns. It's the drain of talent we're going to see. So we've already seen a major uptick in applications from New Zealanders in our Australian offices.
Yeah.
We see that flow directly through to the results of the survey. Australia is a nearshoring option for New Zealanders. So I see Australia as an opportunity for the labour market to move without necessarily having to relocate across to the other side of the world.
Yeah.
So what we traditionally see is New Zealanders move offshore to the UK or the US and they flow back through to New Zealand. If they're moving to Australia, it means they're unhappy with New Zealand, but it means that they're still close enough to families, etc., if they have to come back and see them. But the number of New Zealanders willing to relocate to Australia at the moment, I think that the survey shows 42% of talent in the mid to senior level of New Zealand professional or corporate, within corporate roles at the moment, are looking at potentially moving to Australia. And only 2% of Australians are willing to move to New Zealand. I mean, that is a concern. That shows where we are.
Yeah. And also just one point in that answer, you're talking about mid-senior level managers. Now, historically, we've talked about, the younger generation going off, doing their OE, then perhaps moving to Australia for a greater thing. But this now is people who have established roles and established families and established lifestyles in New Zealand doing the same thing.
And that is my concern because these are long-term movers. So we have seen people move offshore for financial gain, and that's okay.
And career opportunities
in Australia. But the level and the number of people who are now looking at that as a viable option, that is the concern to me because I think we will lose them for good.
What's the answer? Do people want to be New Zealand? Are New Zealanders aspirational about New Zealand, or have they sort of given up and going, oh well, the grass is greener, I'm going to go?
Yeah, look, my concern is that from an aspirational perspective, we have lost our mojo.
The Aussie relocation is not new, but has been reignited since the borders reopened. Immigration stats show that in the year to March 2024, of all Kiwis leaving, 55% head to Australia. That's about 44,500 a year.
Yeah, so we were living in Dunedin. We lived there most of our life, and for my wife all her life. And we just sort of watched New Zealand change a bit.
Darren Keane is one of those who moved. He is now on the Gold Coast. Why? Why did you want to go so much?
For us, we'd had a tough time with business. We'd had a tough time with being locked up with COVID. There was better opportunities for my wife here as a teacher. And we'd had a pretty rough ride as a landlord over that period as well.
So you up sticks. What is better?
Obviously, the weather in Queensland is amazing compared to Dunedin. Pay-wise, my wife's on a far better remuneration package and salary package here as a teacher.
Right.
And we've had some amazing opportunities in business here that are, being a bigger country and a bigger market, is a lot more opportunity for us in Australia.
Right. So you posted a lot about your experience moving over to Queensland a couple of years ago. So as a result of being active on social media, what happened?
So we started posting our journey because we couldn't find a lot about moving when we first moved. And then one day we woke up and it blew up. And people started asking me a lot about how to move themselves, and they were getting some quite detailed questions and they wanted to know about it. So I kept making the videos. Then after being in Australia for about a year, it got out of control to the point that I actually had to turn it into a business. I went and became a fully licensed real estate agent, and now I spend full time helping people plan to leave New Zealand, budget to move over, buy or rent a house when they get here, and help them for the whole process of getting here and starting up again.
So I guess the unusual or the surprising factor is that there is enough demand to move there for you to create a business out of it.
Yeah, the demand is unreal. Our video products and our education products are downloaded all the time. We actually notice a spike in downloads if there's a major event happen in New Zealand. And Keen on Property, our buyer agents company, is actually booked out till March. So if you wanted to move today, I wouldn't be able to fit you into at least March.
I'm curious to know what kind of people are using you and turning to you for advice.
Yeah, like I remember back to when we were younger, it is very much what was happening in the 90s and that. It's the brain drain. We're seeing qualified tradies at the higher end of the spec and middle management and upper management people that are just finding they can't get ahead where they think they should be in New Zealand, wanting to pack up and start again, buy here and either re-establish a business or a company or get into the workforce here for a higher pay rate.
Right, so in terms of being able to set up there, I mean, this idea is that it's better pay, lower house prices, better weather, and more opportunities. Is all of that true?
So house prices have definitely got tougher in the last sort of 12 months. Obviously, the New Zealand market's been going quite backwards and the Australian market's been aggressively going forward. But what is different is most people I find are moving to a higher wage, and things like their superannuation is far higher. With our government now mandating that you must be 11.5% on top of your wage is super.
11.5% on top of your wage?
Yeah.
Compared to 3% in New Zealand?
Yes, and that's going up next year again to 12%.
Wow. Okay, so that's a huge difference. Do you think this is sustainable for you as a business? I mean, these things come in cycles.
I believe for our business and the size we are, there will always be a market for people that want to move and they want the help and they don't want to have the stress. They want to have it reduced and made it very simple for them. And I have no vision of making this a giant global company. I want a lifestyle. That's why we moved here.
Yep.
And I want to keep it in control. Hence why we cap the number of customers we deal with and we book out. But I do believe New Zealand's in for a rough 5 or so years, and I think this will carry on. With Brisbane holding the Olympics in 2032, we have a lot of government spending in the region, and there's a lot of opportunity for people to come over and manage big projects. If they're tradies, be on very high pay on government projects or state projects, and that's not going to slow down anytime soon. Those offers are there for everyone at different parts of the workforce.
So, 4 to 5 rough years ahead, according to Darren. Is that true? Cameron Bagri is an independent economist and former chief economist for ANZ Bank. Can you describe to me where we are in this downturn?
Right, so the Reserve Bank knocked the stuffing out of the economy in 2024. The good news is that the high frequency economic data that's quite timely suggests we reached a turning point in the fourth quarter of 2024. So that's the good news. We've got forward propulsion back. It's going to take, I think, another 6 to 9 months before the level of activity gets us a little bit more into that happy zone. So, we tend to focus on growth, which is a change metric, but you need to focus on the level of activity as well. And I think we're going to need to see 2, 3, potentially 4 quarters of economic growth before that level of activity gets us back into a little bit more of the happy zone. We're seeing growth out there at the moment, but it's pretty anemic.
Yep.
And demand's starting to come back, stimulated by interest rates. But you drive around New Zealand roads and you see a classic example in regard to the productivity problem we've got. Right. And if you've got a productivity problem, you just can't grow that fast.
Interest rates being cut, people go, oh, that's a stimulus, so surely that's going to get us back on track. But does that actually fix anything?
We tend to get a little bit overly excited by what's called demand, retail sales, housing, whether people are out there spending money, what it feels like in business. That's the old sort of the sugar candy stuff. And you can pump a bit of sugar candy into any economy by cutting interest rates or by the government spending a whole lot of money. The money line, the substance line across the economy is what's called the supply side capacity. What's potential growth? And how fast can you grow from year to year consistently without generating inflation? That's what's called the money line. And what we've seen is both the Reserve Bank and Treasury has downgraded their estimate of the money line over the past sort of 2 to 3 years progressively. Why? Because we've got a productivity problem.
You used a stat regarding our level of our level of productivity over the past 10 years. What was that again?
So if you go back sort of 20 odd years ago, New Zealand was seeing productivity growth. This is 1.4% per year, which is pretty good. If you look at what we're seeing on average for the past decade, 0.2, which is basically static. We're not going anywhere. So we've dropped the ball. And that's the money line that drives your economy.
So fixing productivity is your number one issue, would you say?
That and division are my two biggest concerns I've got about New Zealand at the moment.
Well, let's talk about division. What do you mean by division? Is this political division? Is it division among ethnicities? What do you mean by that?
Young versus old, rural versus urban, ethnic, the whole treaty debate in regard to what's going on, but it's a global phenomenon. New Zealand is not immune in regard to what's going on there. We're seeing political fracturing to the far left, to the far right. You have a look at French politics, you have a look at UK politics, obviously Canada, old Trumpy in the United States. On some levels, New Zealand probably looks pretty good.
Yeah, but I mean, so from an economic perspective, an economic productivity perspective, what's so bad about this division?
In order to drive productivity, we're going to need to see economic reform, right? A lot of change. Change is very difficult to instigate when you got the political periphery, either sides that are dominating, because you can't get a consensus. Consensus comes from within what's called the political middle, centre left, centre right. And when that centre left, centre right is sort of hollowed out to the far left and the far right, you can't get a consensus in regard to economic reform. And that just drives uncertainty. And when you've got a whole lot of uncertainty, that's the antithesis towards investing. Firms hit the hold button.
But you just mentioned that New Zealand may, even though we are, polarising, we may be more attractive than perhaps some of the other sort of OECD countries.
Yeah, well, on some levels, we're probably wearing one of the cleanest of all the dirty shirts.
Okay.
In regard to what's...
So do we need that? Do we need that political consensus or that political middle ground in order to fix this productivity problem that we have?
It's one driver, right? We can't just point the finger at the government here and think they're going to fix everything and suddenly turn New Zealand into this magically productive economy, because the private sector's got to do an awful lot of the heavy lifting. But certainly, if you look at competition policy, if you look at the education system, you look at the quality of New Zealand's infrastructure, there's a whole lot of stuff that needs to come out of central government in regard to fixing those big structural problems, and they're not quick fixes. But if you look at some of the other fixes we need to see, uptake of AI. And that's not going to be led by central government. It's not going to be led by local government. The private sector's got to take the lead on that sort of stuff. If you look at around the boardroom tables, I think we're too focused on governance and not focused enough on strategy.
And by strategy, do you mean risk-taking? Do you mean a growth mindset? What do you mean by that?
Risk-taking, growth mindset, One of the issues I find quite astounding in New Zealand is that we're pretty keen to give money back to shareholders in the form of dividends, which in my mind is a little bit of a failure, that we can't add value.
So that's more of a growth or an aggressive kind of mindset. Are you saying that in the New Zealand sort of psyche, business psyche, we don't have that?
I think New Zealand's lost a little bit of its mojo, a little bit like the All Blacks have lost their mojo over a number of years.
Yep.
And yeah, how do we get that sort of stuff back? How do we get a little bit of Australian swagger about us?
Australian swagger. You know, that's not a popular, I mean, in the Kiwi psyche kind of thing, comparing us to Australia and say we should be more like Australia is not a popular kind of, pronouncement, is it? But is that what we need to do?
Oh, steps in that direction in regard to otherwise. Look, if you're getting 0.2% productivity growth year after year, what does that mean in practice? Your wages are going to move up in line with the cost of living and no more. So you've got one hell of an economic incentive to go live somewhere else overseas, which is what we're seeing. People are departing.
Which takes us back to Anna Burson, the mid-level manager who's called Australia home. Are you surprised? I mean, we've got this research which shows that the intention of sort of like middle to senior managers is that a lot of them are prepared to go and relocate.
Not surprised at all. I remember when I was starting to job hunt just to see what was out there, I was surprised at how many different brands, like aspirational brands that I could work for that I never even considered in New Zealand. That's probably one of the things I like about Australia, is because the market's so big, the country's so big, there's so many more opportunities, and then naturally you start thinking bigger and being more creative than you would in a smaller pond.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're having a good time. Is there any chance of you coming back?
I think in future I'll come back. At the moment, we were looking to move. We thought all our family, relatives, healthy and whatnot, so might as well move while we're young and there's no concerns back home. Home will always be home. There's no place like New Zealand. It's just not for now.
And that wraps up this episode of the NBR Podcast. Links to any social media clips used are in the description. And thanks to content producers Joseph Hitayasu and Jake Latham. For early access to new episodes, subscribe at nbr.co.nz. Next week, is Auckland Airport actually making excessive profits? I'm Simon Shepherd. We'll catch you then.